Hope you all are having fun by learning all these from amazing artists. I'm Nandini Singh, who will be your host for this session. Welcome to WTF 20, a 3-day digital conference for artists brought to you by PrintShop by Designhill, which is one of the fastest growing creative print-on-demand marketplace. I would like to thank our associating partners, Illustrators Artists Club, Graphic Designers Club, Pattern Designers Club, Typography Designers Club, Logo Designers Club, and our online learning partner, Milan Art Institute. Please welcome our keynote speaker for the day, Jessica. It's really real, funny, and inspiring, like it happens in movies, how and when she decided to be a comic. I bet she'll tell you that by herself. So she's passionate about breaking down taboos and empowering women. She creates webcomics on a wide range of topics, from the female body to the tragedy of modern dating and sex, which is really a taboo in many of our countries. So these chronicles of her life and the lives of many have been featured in publications like Huffington Post and BuzzFeed. She has collaborated with companies such as Square and Skillshare also. So today she'll be talking about life as a comic, developing strong observational skills for doodling. So guys, just a quick update. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the questions tab and we'll pick it up from there. And you'll receive a few polls in between the session. Please answer to that as well. Before we start the session, I would like to give a quick shout out to PrintShop by Designhill and our online learning partner, Milan Art Institute. So before we start, let's look at what PrintShop by Designhill and WTF is all about. Okay, guys, so without further delay, let's hear it from the keynote speaker of the day. Jessica, over to you, please.
Yeah, great. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to be talking to you about life's a comic and developing strong observational skills for doodling. So I hope by the end of this presentation that you guys are ready to go out into the world and are running with ideas buzzing in terms of how to make your own life into a comic. So back to the topic of the presentation, tips and tricks to turn your life into a comic and to develop strong observational skills. And when I got the kind of the subject for this keynote, I found it really interesting because, of course, when you're doodling and when you think of the word doodling, you think of something that you do really in your subconscious. It's something that just comes really naturally. And so what this made me do is kind of really have to go back and pull apart my process and what to me kind of happens naturally, and to pick it apart and kind of distill and unpack kind of my method. I hope that what I share with you today is useful and things that you can really start to implement in your own life and in your own work. So wherever you are in the world, I know that we have people from all over the world take a lean back with your wine or your coffee, depending on what time it is, or it doesn't matter really, and let's get started. So this is the account. I'm Vanilla Cool Dance, Doodles by Jess. I started it around a little over 3 years ago when I had moved to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam. Everything is about me and my own life. It's grown since then. It's been featured in BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, and I've collaborated with a few different brands, but really it's all stories about myself and my life. I find that everything is super personal. You can see that this character, she pops back up a few different places with the kind of medium wavy hair and the beautiful stick figure drawing. But yeah, so I'm open about everything in my life on this account. I also on Sundays feature stories from other people and in the community, and I love to share that with Your Story Sunday.
Yeah, I've seen that on your Instagram. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, I've seen that on your Instagram, and a lot of people, reply to you. And I really like that thing that you are actually interacting with people out there. And, you are it takes real guts to, sharing your personal stories in a comment way to the world out there.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I've always been extremely open about things. It comes kind of in the family history of my upbringing. For instance, nothing is off the table in the Stahl family. My mother caught me on the first time when I lost my virginity. And after she was super angry at me, she sat me down and said, never trust a man to get the job done. And here's $50 for a vibrator. So you can imagine the dinner talk at the Stahl household and how the openness kind of started from my childhood. What I try and do in my own work, and I focus kind of on 3 different areas. The first is I try to laugh about life, and I try to transform anything, the sad, the ugly, whatever it is, into something lighter and more positive, because I think that you can either look at life in the negative and you can cry about it, or you can try to laugh about it. And I always try to laugh about it. Another thing I try to do is break down taboos. And this is something that, especially nowadays, is something I'm leaning way more into. I just think it's so important. I don't know where you are in the world. I grew up in the States, and there, even in my childhood, I feel like the sex education was really limited for women. And so I just think I try to normalize things that should already be normal and open up conversations that need to happen to make things more common ground for people out there. And then, of course, I also document the tragedy of modern dating, because I've been on all the apps, and yeah, it's just funny. We our generation, I'm 30 years old, and I'm in the millennials are the only generation that will have been in the old form of dating, so the more traditional, and now the online world. And so I think it's a really interesting area to get content from. But let's get started at the very beginning. So I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about myself and how I got started before we go into the tips and tricks. But let's fast forward a few years to 2014. So I was living in New York at the time, working in advertising as an art director. And I had a great job, but something was missing. And as a millennial, and I did what a lot of us do these days, and I had my quarter life crisis. So I quit my job in New York. I grabbed a backpack and went to Southeast Asia. And there I spent a few months meeting people from all over the world. It opened my eyes to such a different way of life, also kind of different cultures and how people from all over the world live. And for me, it was just amazing and a constant source of inspiration. This is not one of the tips. I do not necessarily think you need to quit your life to go backpack to become a doodler, but this is my journey. And then I went back to the States because I was madly in love with somebody, and we had been together for a few years, so I had moved back with him. And then he crushed my heart into a million pieces, and it took me quite a while to pull myself back together. As you can imagine, I had no job at the time. I had to move back in with my parents, so I was not feeling my best. So I did what all the heartbroken people say they're going to do, but not all do. and I booked a one-way ticket to Europe, and I moved to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam. I had never been before, but I knew that it was a really creative city and that it was super international. And I didn't know that it rained. So if you ever move countries, please do yourself a favor and check the weather. But weather aside, I fell in love with it. And yeah, so it's an amazing city. Because I thought I was going to get a job in 1 to 2 months, I took a free-ish room with 17 flatmates in university housing. It was this tiny, tiny room that was too small to rent out, so I illegally paid the students in TVs or couches to let me stay there. So that's where I lived, and again, I thought it was going to be 1 or 2 months. So I go into that mindset and I start applying for jobs in advertising here as an art director, and that 1 or 2 months turned into a bit longer than I had expected. Yes, that was, to put an emphasis on it, 1.5 years where I was not with a job, and where the fun employment feeling from backpacking in Southeast Asia quickly turned into the unemployed feeling of job searching for 1.5 years. And my positive attitude kind of turned into something like this. This is kind of how I looked on a daily basis back then. And I started to do a lot of this. So I started to question every life choice I had made. Why am I an approaching 30-year-old living illegally with 17 flatmates in the Netherlands with no job and no family near here? But I really wanted to stay, and I really wanted to make it work in the Netherlands. So I was really dead set on making it happen. And I wanted to kind of turn this. This is kind of what I looked like, although, you know, she was winning because she had a desk. I didn't have a desk to cry under, but this is kind of what I was looking like. And I decided, you know what, enough of this. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself anymore. I'm going to look like this. So Amy Poehler, my vision board, still with wine because I think it's super important. You know, I love wine, but she's in on the joke. She's not the butt of the joke. She kind of has rewritten the narrative of her life into a way where she's confident with it. You know, she's like in on the secret. So this is who I wanted to be. I did not want to be the other girl. And so I thought about how was I going to do this, and how was I going to become, well, Amy Poehler, or at least have the confidence of her. And then I had an idea because I had been kind of puttering around with certain projects or different things, and nothing was sticking. And then I finally had an idea, and this is where my first tip comes in. So I decided that every day for 1 year, I'm going to draw anything, the absurd, the sad, the awkward, the terrible, whatever I was feeling, I was going to transform it into the comedic. So I went about this also as almost a way of therapy to kind of try and reframe how I viewed my own life. And I think if you talk to a lot of different artists out there, they'll probably say, well, maybe not all, but a lot of the ones I know, that they did start this way, where they did draw kind of every day for 1 year. And maybe a year's too long, but 100 days, you see all these challenges online, and I highly recommend you do it, because the thing is that, at least for me and how my brains worked, it's really a muscle. So this, the way you look at the situation or the way you reframe things, I find it way easier to do when I've been doing it kind of on a daily basis than when I go and stop for a while and then try and get back into it. Because I think some of my work is not necessarily, you know, it's really about everyday life, and kind of have to pull out the gem of humor from maybe even a seemingly normal conversation. And that's a skill set that you can develop, and a muscle that you can so it becomes like clockwork. So yeah, so that's why I decided to do it every day for a year, and then Vanilla Cool Dance was born. That's my character. And how did Vanilla Cool Dance, the name, come to be? Well, it was actually my very first childhood AOL Instant Messenger screen name. For those of you who know what AIM Instant Messenger is, back when we were with dial-up. And the vanilla was for my guinea pig Vanilla, because chocolate and coffee had passed away. The dance was because I did jazz, tap, and ballet. And the cool was because I decided to ask my dad for help, and he thought that I was cool and that my screen name was missing an adjective. So that's how Vanilla Cool Dance came to be. I was super embarrassed about it because everyone else is like basketball girl 33 or Backstreet Boys dude 35, and there I am with vanilla cool dance. So it was kind of perfect for me because I was also using this drawing as a way to reclaim any awkward or thing about my life and rewrite my own story with it. So that's how vanilla cool dance was born. And so my second tip, and what I started to do right off the bat, was use your feelings. So if you're happy, that's amazing. Use it for your work. If you're sad, great, even better, because you're going to have a lot of content to work on. If you're angry or confused, let's lean into that. But let's not just lean into it normally. Let's use it, that emotion, and then flip it on its head. So what I like to do is I like to take how I'm feeling, and you could even take one feeling or one scenario and make all these different comics from it, because it depends on how you view it and what angle you view it from. So I'm going to take you through, I've deconstructed a few of my comics to take you through the process that I sometimes do. So let's get started. So let's take interview rejection, because I had many. So this is kind of the objective thing that has happened to you. And then you can start to ask yourself questions about it. So how does society want you to feel about this? When else have you been rejected? Have you ever felt this way before? And how did it make you feel? And that feeling that you're feeling, is that how you think you should feel, or is it different? So these are the kind of questions that I like to ask myself about a situation. And then you can narrow in on the most interesting ones. So for this one, I narrowed in on when else have you been rejected, and when else have I felt that way? And when else have I felt rejected? Well, just as in job search having no luck, I was also having not so much luck in dating. So there was a very easy parallel here for me. And then once you get this, you can take it a step further and you get to a comic. So this is comparing my job rejections to my dating rejections. So when the interviewee says, "You're great, and I can see you being the perfect fit. Only thing is we're not ready to bring in someone full-time right now, but maybe one day." And then you kind of compare it to the men in your life or that I was dating that were very happy to date you. They just weren't happy to date you full-time or to commit to you. So my reaction, how funny, my Tinder date basically said the same thing. And it's funny because I can look back at this comic and see how I was really, really, what's the word? Self-deprecating humor here. I think it was also a testament to my emotions at the time, but it still made me feel like I was controlling the narrative, and I still could laugh about it. And then you can do the same thing with a different subject. So for instance, take your dating life, and let's talk about, do you feel how you think you should feel? Because I think in dating life and in love especially, the heart is a lot different than what the brain says. So the brain knows better and the heart just hurts, especially when it comes to rejection. So this is an exercise that I do quite a lot, which is what is the brain thinking and what is the heart thinking, and are they on the same page or are they not? So for instance, advice falling on deaf ears or hearts in this case. You have the very confident brain, nerdy brain, saying, if he doesn't treat you the way you deserve, he doesn't deserve you. Very wise brain. And the heart thinks, thanks to that super rational advice that I plan on ignoring. And for anyone that's ever been in love, this is typically how it goes. So I always think it's funny to, this I drew when I was also going through a breakup, but all of a sudden it just becomes funny. So this is how I worked through things, and this is how I processed things going on in my life. Or another example, for instance, here the heart and the brain are on the same page when it comes to casual dating. So the brain says, we're not in a place to have a serious relationship right now, right? And the heart says, of course, I'm all about keeping it casual. Until we fast forward when the brain wonders, why does he even bother? Because the heart has run off and is in love. And then, of course, the heart can also sometimes be replaced with different body parts. For instance, here, when the brain is talking to the vagina and the brain wants the girl to go home alone, and the vagina says no. And the brain, again, always exacerbated brain, says good talk. So this is always, I find, really fun to play around with. You can do a lot of different creative ideas here, and it also kind of helps you make light of situations in your life and tell them in a more fun way.
Yeah, so I really love, first of all, I really love the, so every artist has a creative process, and I love the fact, and I'm sure people are really loving your content, the way it's basically the way you are, making them understand how your creative process works. You're explaining it very well, like, I have this point in my mind, and I like now how I portray it. So it's really great. So you want to take any questions up from the question section, Jessica?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to draw every day, but sometimes I can't think of anything, and I usually don't doodle. Think that you could help with creativity. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I
think yeah, many people are aborting it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of work you are drawing. I think that maybe you could, can you answer in the chat so I can see it? The presentation will come back, JJ Curtis. But I think that, again, not every day you're going to feel that, creative energy. I think that sometimes when you're kind of blocked, that's where the real good stuff happens, because you have to dig a bit deeper. I'm definitely going to go into some more tips of areas that I kind of go back to. Like, I have some default topics that I go back to when I'm hitting a wall somewhere. So I always have my default things that I can pull out. I also think I was mentioning in the last panel discussion, for those who were there, that be kind to yourself. If there's no need to post every day. It's okay. Don't force it if it's not happening. And also when things like this, I also mentioned we're all in this crazy situation the past few weeks. For me personally, I now have this surge of creativity. So I'm making tons of comics, and I can then use them on a rainy day when I'm not feeling super inspired, or use them, spread them out. So that would be some of my advice on that question. And I also see a question that says, I'm bad at doodling. But that's I kind of want to address that, because I don't know if you saw my characters, but they are a bit like glorified stick figures. And I used to think that I needed to be an artiste to express myself. And I'm definitely not, like in the traditional sense, but because, people don't care. Nobody, of course, I sometimes get comments on my posts like, I don't get why anyone's following this. You don't know how to draw, but the rest of the followers don't seem to care. I think it's how you just have to be able to express something. In some of my favorite accounts, Hyperbole and a Half, I think that was before Instagram, so that's just, you can Google her. They're blobs, but they're very expressive, and they tell a funny story. So I think it's really just a vessel to get your story out.
Yeah, that's actually very true. So I have one question for you. Before people start, artists start, and we also see a lot of emerging artists. They keep on answering like, what are the tools that you use? So what are your favorite tools, handy tools that you use on a daily basis for your artwork?
Yeah. So when I started out, I used to just use pen and watercolor, and I would just take a picture of it and immediately post it. So I didn't even do any color correction. So if you scroll back to my first post, it was really just on paper, and it's naturally progressed. So now I just got the iPad, I think 2 months ago, and I got Procreate is a great tool with also the Apple Pen, and it's really just like drawing it by hand. I downloaded some watercolor pens and brushes, and it's not 100% the same. I'm sure if I took more tutorials on it, I could get it to more closely match really hand-drawn, because I think there's incredible things that you can do with digital technology these days. But yeah, I think just a pen and paper, if that's all you have, and that's actually when I had the most growth, was just, nothing fancy, and just, yeah. I think just do it from the heart, and hopefully it resonates with you.
Okay, guys, so that's what we have in store for you. So stay tuned. We'll share the links of all the sessions coming up for tomorrow's day in the chat section. So over to you, Jessica. Please carry on. So I have another question for you. So as you were saying, and I've been through your Instagram account as well. So I've seen, also it takes a pressure on artists who keeps on doodling to post daily, which is fine. I mean, I understand you said we all need to be kind on ourselves in our respective jobs, but it's also very much important to be, keep on updated with the trends. Like I've seen your artworks on quarantine and all these corona stuff which is going on around the world. And moreover, I've seen you took that stuff and you created that art on every day, relatable to every niche, every sections of the people, like on government, on co-quarantine, and on self-quarantine. So how important and how do you think creatively? Like, what's from where your creativity comes? Because I know you are very humorous, you're very funny, what I think people like about you is you're very transparent, and you're very you convert everything on humor. So how do you do that? If you could give everybody, because everybody is not like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think everyone necessarily needs to be like that. For instance, I know a lot of people in the comic or the doodling community, and a lot of them, their take on how they talk about what was happening with the coronavirus and quarantine is totally different than how I would write about it. So I try to be sensitive. I think that in this time, I try to bring laughter or humor to it. So I also think that there's some things that I feel, of course, like more sentimental. I'm not just always funny or thinking funny my whole life, but I try to still post things or reframe things in a way that makes sense for my account. So I still look at the quarantining as, how does it affect somebody who's single, what exes come out of the woodwork, so whereas some other account maybe will be more on the heart and connection with humanity and other people and distance, and that's probably not where you follow me. I do it in other ways, like where I ask people to share from all over the world where they're working from, and then I post it. But on my actual comic account, I definitely go for humor. So again, the last two things that I talked to, tips are practice every day, at least in the beginning, until it becomes like clockwork, and flip how you look at things. So whatever you're feeling, lean into that and ask questions about why you're feeling a certain way. This is another way I like to work. So you take an objective situation, the situation that happened, and you play around with what were you thinking versus what were they thinking, and taking another look at what's funny about this. So this is always, I definitely do it where I project a lot onto other people. And so I like to think kind of what is reality versus not. For instance, this is kind of a summary of my early 20s when he would ask me to brunch, and then I would hear wedding bells. So when in reality he was probably hungry and I was probably just there. So this is definitely something that I like to play with lots. Or on a sadder note, when you're both having this conversation, but you can feel something's off and it's probably about to end. But if you gave it to your phone to anyone else, they would probably look through it and say, oh yeah, don't worry, it looks pretty normal, the conversation. But you both have that feeling, that stone in your stomach, your pit in your stomach, knowing that something's off and you don't know how to get it back. Or on a more positive note, when you're both actually on exactly the same page, falling in love, but you're both afraid of saying something first and fear of rejection. So this is also something that you can have a lot of fun with, because we often put in thoughts and fill in the thoughts of others all the time. And another way of doing this is also to think of, what do you think now versus then, and how has your opinion changed? So this can be anything from 30 years ago, or when you were a kid to you now. It can be you now to what you imagine you're going to think in the future. It could be from 3 days ago to now, or 3 months ago to now. This is a lot of fun. I explore with a lot. So for instance, a very simple punctuation, or not even punctuation, it's the 3 dots that happen when you can see somebody's writing you, and how at the beginning of a relationship, those 3 dots are filled with all this excitement, anticipation, and joy. And then how at the end of a relationship, it's completely changed. And now it's just filled with fear and anxiety and sadness. And so it's just interesting to look at something like this. And there's so much weight in that little symbol of the 3 dots. Or on a more light note, sneaking out then versus now. So sneaking out of your parents' house to go to parties when you were younger, and now, and I'm 30, but still like to party, but maybe less late. So now I'm sneaking out of parties to go to my house. And if there's any parents in the watching tonight, I guess it can also be sneaking out of your parents' house to go to parties back then, and now it's sneaking out of your own house to go to parties now. So I think it can be, this kind of thing can be done in a lot of different ways. And then of course there's showering. I don't know if I need to explain it very much, but I think as a kid, nobody wanted to be in the shower. And I think now a lot of it's changed, especially for women. So that sums up that kind of section. And then another thing that I like to do is embrace the what the fuck just happened moments, because those happen a lot. Those are the moments that are so absurd that you have to tell somebody immediately. You have to text your friend. You have to call somebody. You have to laugh out loud because you're kind of having this out-of-body experience where something's just been so crazy. And what's kind of nice about these is I like to call it the gallery of low-hanging fruit. So you don't actually, or what happens when I experience this is I don't actually change the scenario at all. I normally write it verbatim, the experience, what the person said or what the screenshot looked like, because it's just crazy in of itself, and it's funny and it's relatable, or it's not relatable because nobody's ever seen something like this before. This happens quite a lot in dating. So for instance, Chip, my date said, luckily for me, this was a Your Story Sunday submission, but when her date said, I'm over my last girlfriend, I just jerk off to her still. Because that's absurd and not a normal thing to say on a first date. So this girl is probably having this experience, like she cannot process what is happening. And this is just so absurd that I like to draw it just as is. Or for instance, this is a screen grab conversation of my ex-boyfriend from America. And he was not the best at texting me back. And for a long time, I made a lot of excuses. And then, of course, when we broke up, I was really, I was really hurt. And but when you look at this text message, I mean, it's also kind of like, what the hell was I thinking? You know, boyfriend at the time says, sorry, I missed our FaceTime date. This is the next day, of course. And I said, what happened to you? And he says, got a little too engaged trying to fix the washing machine. Also note to self, grammar is really important to me. But anyways, got a little too engaged trying to fix the washing machine. Despite being a water-resistant phone, the screen tends to freak out when you touch it with wet hands. So my boyfriend at the time had not only forgotten our Skype date, but he saw that I called, decided that he couldn't text me, and then waited until the next day to let me know. So by simply putting this caption, washing machine 1, girlfriend 0 on it, I immediately was able to laugh about it and also at myself and kind of forgive myself for putting up with this kind of thing. And then, of course, you always have a very low-hanging fruit, which is the nip slip, that moment in class when you're in the front row and you're not sure if your boob has been out for 30 seconds or 30 minutes. This is kind of like my entire college, or when it happens again, or when it happens again. So again, these don't need any looking at, they're just like from a different perspective, they're just funny. And another tip of mine is to write down everything. So I think I saw in one of the questions somebody had, I took a look and it said, what do you do when you're in, when you can't write things down right away? I think try and remember as much as possible. And then the second you can write it down, do, because, you know, I write down a lot of things and then I refer to it over the next year even. So sometimes things don't make sense yet, or I can't figure out the funny way to crack it yet, but I keep going back to that notepad. This is actually a page from my very first notepad. You can also see there's some like random advertising thing in there too. But this is my very first notepad where I started to jot down notes about what I thought could be interesting for drawing. And it was super romantic. I had this lovely sketchbook. I definitely just type on the iPhone now, so you don't need to do it in any specific way. These are some of my very first notes, I think from 2017. So I apparently got a B in physical education, which is really difficult to do. You know, apparently I got stuck squatting at a grocery store because my knees aren't great. So these are all random thoughts that I have. This is the inner workings of my mind and something that I refer to. You can see how the list grows when you have a breakup. So write everything down, because another thing that I like to do with these notes is writing a comic. For instance, let's take an example here. When someone ends something right before your holiday, let's just say that. But if you wrote this down and you draw a comic of it right when the breakup, I guess, didn't happen, or right when you're kind of in this breaking up phase, your comic is going to be very different than when you approach the same subject a few weeks later, a few months later, when you've already healed a bit. So you may approach it from a different angle. And so there's many ways that you can revisit kind of the same situation and transform it into multiple different kind of comics that all have a different feeling. And then another thing that I find super important is to use your voice. So for me, I started the comic account as a way to heal myself or look at the world a bit differently and as a type of therapy. But as it's grown and as I've grown, I've realized that I really have a platform where I can speak my mind and where I can try and make a change in the world and open up conversations. So that I think we all have a voice and we all have an opinion. So to take a look at what's happening in the world and what's happening in your world and what aren't you liking and what don't you agree with, and how can you make a statement. So what I did with this was I actually asked my community why they followed me on Instagram. And what's great is that a lot of their responses were very in line with what I wanted to do as well and the way I wanted to use my voice. So I was already doing this, but I wanted to do it even more. So I got answers. I think one of my favorite is from a 24-year-old guy with limited experience, and he finds that reinsurance in the candid way I explore relationships, or sex stories that normalize normal things. Another one I really liked is the unabashed realities of dating from the female perspective, the brutal honesty. And so that some of these are for men, some of these are for women, but I think there's this common theme here, and this is super in line with my passion and where I find I want to make impact in the world. And so to show you some examples of comics that I try to touch on this are something like this. So I had, I think, briefly mentioned how when I grew up, I don't necessarily feel like, there's that TV show now, Sex Education and Netflix. But, I think adults actually, I watched the show too, but I think adults still need a very good dose of sex education. And so, for instance, can women have wet dreams? Well, apparently they can, but you wouldn't know until you're like late 20s because nobody taught you. So when you wake up, it's all very confusing. So things like this where we may be older, but we're still learning. And I think it's really nice to start these conversations online. Or for instance, nobody really talked to me about, growing up, about female pleasure, and that it was important equally for a woman to have pleasure as a man. And I didn't learn that until I was much older. And I think that we should not settle for, or we should know more about what we can have, because I think it's, not everyone talks about this. And then this is probably one of the more political things I've ever done, but this was back when states in America were making really harsh restrictions and changing laws to make it much harder to get abortion. So here I've compared the state of Alabama to Gilead, which is from The Handmaid's Tale. And it's basically like going back in time to this world where women have like no rights and men rule everything. So this is one of my more political statements. But again, I think just use your voice and have an opinion. And sometimes people really don't like your work and don't like your opinion. And then they unfollow you, but just be true to you. And I think that when you use your voice and when you make a statement, then people really remember you, and at least you're starting a conversation than nobody talking about you at all, or having conversation on your platform. And if you're completely stuck and have no source of inspiration, what I do is talk about girl problems. And if you're a guy listening right now, same thing, guy problems, or girl problems, but probably guy problems. For me, this is, if I'm stuck, then I really just sit there and think, okay, what is the girl problem I can talk about today? So for instance, when you are having those days when you hate everyone, and then you realize that it's because you have your period. Or another way of thinking about it is those days that you hate everyone and you are praying that your period comes, because if it doesn't, then something is just wrong with you. Or a pint of ice cream can also be substituted for a bottle of wine when you are at the first half of the tub of ice cream, where you're in this feeling of love for yourself, and then you get to the end of the tub and you kind of hate yourself. And another example of girl problems would be thinking about why I cry. Well, I personally cry when I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm angry, I'm confused. Often I don't know. And the maximum is when I've just seen a trailer to a Disney movie with animals in it. I'm looking at Dumbo. Nobody should watch that without being prepared to cry. So I think in lieu of asking questions right now, I'm actually going to just finish it if it's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I can't see anyone.
Let me tell you, because I have prepared questions for you, and we all do. We have hosted like a lot of webinars, and this is the presentation. I'm your biggest fan now, and I feel like I don't need to ask you anything because you have covered everything in your presentation, and it's going so smoothly. People are loving your content, and it's just fab. So thank you for this. Please go ahead.
Great. I will continue then. So again, just a small recap of the tips and tricks that I hope you take away with you today, which is the first, practice every day. The second, turn things around, flip it how you look at them. The third, compare your thoughts. So how do you feel now versus then? How are you thinking versus them, or versus somebody else? So playing with time and playing with different thoughts from different people. Embrace the WTFJH moments, the what the fuck just happened moments. Write down everything. So even if you don't think that you can find the gem right now, maybe in a few months you'll sit back and look at that notepad and think, oh yeah, I can do something with this. So just write it all down and you'll find the gem sooner or later. Have an opinion, use your voice, and when all else fails, girl problems, because that's my process. And to kind of do a really quick exercise with you guys, if you think of 3 ordinary things that happened today. So let's think about it this way. So your alarm goes off, you go to the office, you make plans with friends. Well, even in these times, you can immediately start using these tips to transform these ideas. So nowadays versus last week, you go to your home office in your underwear, and now you're making virtual plans with friends. So this is just a quick way to show you how, even if you take a look at this week versus 2 weeks ago, you already now have 3 different comics in here, just transforming the everyday into something more funny. And I hope that after today, you guys are going to go out there and make amazing comics and doodles about your life. Please share with me or post it on Instagram and tag me. I will share on my own channels. I'm super excited to see what you guys have taken away from this this presentation. And if you are curious about me, I did indeed turn into this girl. So I found a job. I now, I of course do comics on the side, but I work full-time as the creative director of a reusable water bottle brand in the Netherlands. So I've made it to this girl. I look like her in all aspects of my life, except for dating, because in that case, I definitely still look like the other girl. So thank you guys so much. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you guys, and I will definitely take questions now because I'm sure you guys still have a few. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It was so fab. I have prepared some questions for inspiration and all, but you've covered it all in a very good way. And guys, it's a small request for you. Just please click a picture of your screen, taking Jessica's picture, and tag us and Jessica, PrintShop Global, Designhill, and Vanilla Cool Dance on Instagram. We'll give you the shout out as well, because it was such a power-packed session with you. So I have one small question, because you've covered everything, like everything. I don't have any question to ask you, but I have one question. Like artists start and they think of making money from their art, because considering doodling brands are like very open about considering doodlings including their brands. So how they can approach and find potential clients or companies to work with. Can you give us some tips for that, to approach companies and clients to work with?
I in the beginning of my process, companies more or less approached me. What I try to do now, because of course I hope to monetize this further as well, is I try to find companies and brands that are really align with my own passion. So for me, that's vibrators, sanitary products, sex education platforms, dating services, women's kind of areas. And I will reach out to them and ask for collaboration. And most of the time they write back. I think in the collaborating and the agreeing on what is within budget or within scope, that's where things sometimes are a bit, where you have to kind of play some guesswork on what you price yourself at. But I think just find brands that you would love to work with or love to make work for, and reach out to them, because you want to also make sure, if you have your account, that you're being like true to your followers as well. So I find it really, there should not be a mismatch with the companies you work for. This is on like what you put on your own account. So of course, like if I don't know if maybe a car company is a bad one, but let's say a car company asked me to make drawings for them, that's fine, but I probably wouldn't, it wouldn't be a Vanilla Cool Dance post, because that wouldn't make sense for my account.
It's really it's true, because you have you portray something else. You try to be humorous to your audience. So yeah, that's great, and thank you so much, Jessica. I feel like everybody would be feeling like giving you a virtual hug right now, because it was such an awesome session with you, and everybody learned a lot. People are just so overwhelmed right now. If you can read the chat section, they're just appreciating you a lot. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a great session with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry if I can't answer all the questions. Maybe one or two more, or.
Yeah, so I think we have questions in the questions tab. Let's just take one or two more questions. You can do the questions tab over there.
I think I answered most of them. Am I ever afraid of being rejected from a client or employer due to your erotic content and commentary, or you keep this work out of your portfolio? That's a good question. I am super lucky to work at a very liberal company, Dopper, a reusable water bottle brand. If anyone is in, I'll just plug it. You can tell maybe my boss is following this. But I think, so at my company, my CEO follows me. I think the whole company follows me. I do think that's a really unique case. So I've decided in the beginning of the account, I posted probably on my art director portfolio not as many of the like sexual posts, and I kept it more maybe in dating or in you know, still relatable, but maybe not as risque subject matter. Now that is my passion. So I think if I were to ever move on from the current company I work for, that would be kind of a must-have for the company that I go to, that they're probably in that kind of realm where they're trying to break down taboos and stuff. So for me, then it would be really relevant to keep in, because I've decided that's where my vision is for my future.
That's great. You want to take one more question?
I can take one more.
I think you answered all of them.
Yeah, skincare is a great reference to start in the beginning. There's a lot of courses, and yeah, I think that the point in my career when I knew it was going to be a big thing for me, the drawings and the style was going to be a success, was the Huffington Post picked it up quite early on. And, but, you know, for me, I think that was just validation that you don't need to be a traditional artist or have the best drawing skills to connect with people. And I think that's what that taught me. And so, yeah, just try to make work that resonates with people. And I'm super excited to see what you guys come up with. And I hope you, yeah,
So everybody is going to follow you. I'm sure people who don't even know you earlier, and I'm sure because they are so overwhelmed right now in the chat section, and I've never seen this much of love for any of the speaker till now. So I'm also a big fan of you right now. So I'm sure these people are loving you. So thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us. And thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. And this brings us to the end of this session. And for this day also. So I hope you guys learned a lot and you guys had a lot of fun in the last session of the day. So once again, thank you for all the speakers who took amazing session and shared such beautiful tips with us. Thank you so much, and many thanks to you guys who joined us today. So stay tuned for day 3 for drawing, painting, and visual arts. And many thanks to our hosts as well. So we'll be sharing the registration links for day 3. So see you guys, stay tuned and take care of yourself and create something in quarantine. See you. Thank you, Jessica. See you. Bye. Bye.